So in this video, I'm going to be talking about gamepads or controllers. Since this is a subject that a lot of mainstream gamers don't really care about, but hardcore gamers do care about controllers, and that's why you see people using pro fighting pads for fighting games, or using special kind of keyboards, either soft touch or hard touch keyboards for professional gaming, and even some hardcore games. So these gamepads are primarily focused towards Android devices, since that's what I usually use nowadays, and some consoles too. As you can see, there's a PS Vita. So the first thing you want from a gamepad depends on what kind of gamer you are. If you're a retro gamer, you'd have a different taste. If you're a fighting game fan, you'd have a different taste. If you're a first-person shooter guy, you'd have a different taste. So there is a huge variance in gamepads and quality and the kind of thing you want from a gamepad. So let's take something very, very basic over here. This is your standard DualShock PlayStation 3 controller. And this is probably something you've seen all the time and you game with if you game on the consoles or even some of your Android games. So what's special about the DualShock controller is that the analog knobs, unlike the 360, are placed in a position which is comfortable for gamers if they like light or fast movement kind of games where you can easily access the analog sticks and the buttons at the same time. This might not be a comfortable setup for most first-person shooters. Some people do enjoy it because they get used to it, and the DualShock 4 has a bit of a wider analog curve in which the analogs are placed with a bit more space in it and a touchpad in between. But this one, it works well for most 3D games where you do need an analog to rotate around, like if you play Ape Escape or Crash Bandicoot, the 3D versions at least. So you do use the analog quite a bit, and they're very light to use. They're not too stiff. So I would say this is the most balanced approach you can get when it comes to analog, since it's not too much first-person focus. It's not too much platformer, 3D platformer focused. But the problem with this is the D-pad. Now some people, or mainly mainstream gamers, might be completely okay with this. This is more than enough for them. But for some people, this is not good for fighting games. You know, because this is, I would say it's not a one-piece D-pad. You know, you can see the buttons are kind of, let me get a little closer. The buttons are kind of separated. So it's more like a button D-pad. And to pull off moves, this is not going to be that comfortable, which is why you'll see a lot of pro players would use a fight pad or a stick pad, which is very good for that stuff. And another reason this might not work for retro games also is because some people do like the clicky feeling. This does not have the clicky feeling, so there's no tactile feedback to it. But some people like a soft touch key, which is, you know, they're comfortable with that, and that's okay for that. But this is really not geared towards retro platforming games or even fighting games, so I wouldn't call this a very viable way to play those games if you're really hardcore into them. Another difference you would probably not notice are analog triggers. Now, in most modern controllers, the triggers are analog. I'm not talking about the shoulder buttons, the triggers. What I mean by analog is you can push down, push down, push down, and you have a sensitivity for each level. So if you're playing a racing game, you can push down this controller and change the speed. So the more you push it down, the faster you go. And that's very useful. And if you play racing games, you definitely want a controller that has analog triggers. And not all controllers have this. There are controllers on the market that claim to have it, but they don't have it. The console controllers, they definitely have it. The Xbox 360, the Sony PlayStation 3 controller, it does have analog triggers. But something like, let's say, this is a Much i5. It's a Chinese device. This just has buttons, but they're not analog buttons. But I think they market them as analog. They're not. They're just buttons. Let me see what I have here. I don't have that thing over here, but anyway, there are controllers which are not analog triggers. They're just buttons, and those will not work well for racing games. You do not want to buy that if you're a racing fan. Let's take a look at something that's more Android focused over here. So this is a Moga controller. As you can see, it's a Moga Pro, and it's an attachable controller for your phone or whatever device you want to use. What's interesting about this controller is that it is more like a 360 controller in that the analogs are separated, and this is more focused towards first person shooters, mainly because you have a better control when you're playing first person shooters with split keys. The reason for that is that you have easy access to your D-pad, which you would use to either switch weapons or do special things. Games like Battlefield 4, which use multiple buttons on your controller, it might be more useful for that. And this is not for all gamers. Some gamers might not like it, but at least for me, if I'm playing a first-person shooter, I would prefer this control scheme since it gives me easy access to my D-pad and my buttons. But on the minus side, this is not good for retro games. Specifically the Moga controller, because this D-pad is extremely stiff. Even though this is a one-piece D-pad, ideally this is the D-pad you want for your retro games, but this is too stiff. See? You can't notice it, but this is me softly touching it. It should work when I touch like this, but I have to press. That's not good. And you know that sound it makes? That's horrible. You know, that's not something you want, because that is the sound of the plastic meshing and going in. It's pretty bad quality. This is not useful for anything, not for fighting games, not for platformers or retro games. You do not want this for that. But this is excellent for your basic first-person shooters. It does have analog triggers. Once again, you can see the way you can tell if a trigger is analog. You can see the push or the amount of pressure it gives towards your hand when you put it down. So you see there's pressure to it. One thing I haven't mentioned is if you're into game streaming and you want to game stream your games via Limelight or your what do you call it, nvdia Shield, any third-party controller you buy, you should always check that it has L3 and R3. L3 are basically and R3 are basically your clicks. So this is when you click, that's L3. This is R3, and a lot of the PC games and 360 games use this, and it's very important when you're choosing a controller for game streaming. You want something that gives you that feel. It's important because it's an important key. Otherwise it's going to be impractical and some of the games won't work, which is, well, you know, then it's a waste for you. What else am I going to cover? Okay, let's take a look at the PlayStation Vita. So the PlayStation Vita, compared to the 360 controller that I have over here, you'd notice a few things. Since this is a portable device, the analog sticks are much smaller because it has to be portable. The D-pad is one piece. Now this is an ideal D-pad for some fighting games and platformers and retro games. Why? Because this is a one-piece D-pad. It has a good amount of sensitivity to it. See, I don't have to click too hard. It's quite simple, you know. I don't have to, no need to do that, and it has a decent amount of tactile feel. I mean, when you press this, you know you have pressed a button. You've not missed it. You can't hear it, but you can definitely feel the tactile feel, and that is very important. So I would say this is perfect for your platforming games, retro games, and all that. Now, when you want to play shooters on the Vita, well, if any of you have experience playing shooters on the Vita or maybe the Nintendo DS, you'll know that usually these smaller analogs don't work well. The DS does not have analog, it has nubs. It doesn't have sticks, it has nubs, or one nub. But this has analog sticks. So I haven't told you the difference between a nub and a stick. I'm sorry about that. A nub is flat. A stick is basically, you'll see it's protruding out. This is a stick. When you move it, you can see that that's a stick movement. A nub would be a flat surface that you move around. A nub is never good for first-person shooters, or, well, a nub is not good in any scenario. I mean, they're useful for playing games, for portable devices, but practically, if you're a serious gamer, a nub is usually not that good. It's just something you have to compromise when you make portable devices. So foregoing that, these sticks are okay for first-person shooters. They are not perfect, but they do the job. they're not as accurate as using real big analog sticks like you see on the nvdia shield or your 360 controller. So these are, you know, your regular sticks, and the reason for that is grip. Now grip is something very, very important when playing first person shooters. You want something that when you hold it, there's a grip, it doesn't slip, but this one slips. As you can see, it's the smooth surface makes it slip, and also it's not big enough to have movement, so your dead zone is pretty narrow and you kind of have to be very, very accurate. You have very little movement. See, you can't move too much. So for first person shooters, not so much. For 3D games, it's okay, it does the job. This is what I would call the best compromise you can get. So ideally for portable device, I think it's a good compromise, but do not compromise if you're buying a, you know, a controller. You don't want sticks like these. That's really bad. You don't want that. A normal controller, you want either these or these. That's very important. So we have checked out a bunch of variances, so let's look at the shield controls. So the shield controls are a bit of an anomaly. They are kind of a mixture of 360 controls and PS3 controls in a way. So PS3, because they're both in the same position, so they work for first-person shooters and some platformers too. It's okay. It uses a one-piece D-pad, similar to the Xbox 360 controller. The one-piece D-pad and the 360 controller and the shield is pretty similar, and they're both not too good. Mainly because, again, you have the stiffness factor, and another thing is it's not that stiff also. The problem isn't that it's stiff, it's the accuracy. So when I press the right button, there's a lot of times that you'd accidentally press the upright button, which is not good. There's no precision to it. So if you're going to be doing platforming, jumping games and stuff, and you want precise movement, this is not it. You don't want that, because even though it's one piece, it's kind of imprecise. The precision is not there. You want precision in a controller. Even though it has a good tactile feel, no problem with that. So let's look at the shield. The same problem with the shield. It's a one piece, that's great, but even with this, I was playing Contra. I forgot which Contra it was, but it's the one on Sega. It's a pretty hard one, and oftentimes I would miss my jump or I wouldn't shoot properly up because the precision. Precision. I mean, sorry, I'm sorry. When I press right, it does go right, but sometimes when I wanted to shoot upright, it's not going to do that. It's going to instead use when I want to shoot up, instead of up, it'll do up left, because the curve, if you notice there's a curve, the curve makes it more imprecise. There's too much of a curve, and in general these kind of D-pads are not good for retro or platforming games. For modern games they're okay, because modern games don't really use D-pads that much. This is kind of an ancient thing, which is slowly actually coming back with indie games. A lot of indie games use this, so you got to watch out. If you are looking for that perfect balance, this is not it. This is not it for you. You want something similar to this, or a one-piece D-pad similar to what you have on your Vita. And I think I've covered most of it. So these are just the basic things you'd look for in a controller, and I'm sure there are plenty of other opinions on this. This is by no means perfect. Every gamer is different. You see, I have really big hands. Some people have small hands, so it's different for everyone. So if you've ever wondered why people use different controllers like your Razer Sabertooth or your Logitech controls, it's because everybody has a special way of playing games, of holding their triggers, of using their analog sticks. So it's different for everyone, and there's no one size fits all. But there are some things you have to look for depending on the kind of gamer you are. If you are a racing fan, you want good analog triggers. If you're a first person shooter, you want good analog sticks. You don't want nubs. If you're a platforming guy, you want a good D-pad. So these are things you should definitely look out for, and I hope this video is giving you some reference of what kind of gamer you are and what kind of D-pad you want, what kind of analog stick you want, and I hope it's helped you in some way. And if you like the video, go ahead and like it. If you dislike it, go ahead and dislike it. But as always, thank you for watching.